Take a long, slow breath, feel your shoulders soften, and let your mind drift into the calm, steady rhythm of a narrative meant to unfold gradually, like a soft voice speaking beside the flicker of a fire on a cold autumn night. This is the beginning of a long walk through history, unrushed, detailed, rooted in the deep past, and meant to guide you gently into rest as it unfolds. The history of Thanksgiving does not begin with a single moment, nor with a single feast, nor with any specific date on a calendar. It begins instead with the land itself, and with the people who lived on it thousands of years before the holiday existed. To understand the origins of what we now call Thanksgiving, you must first picture the world long before colonies, ships, borders, or the idea of a United States. Imagine the region of northeastern North America long before Europeans arrived. Forests stretched endlessly, thick with oak, hickory, chestnut, pine and maple trees. In autumn, those forests burst with colour, red gold, deep orange and pale yellow, before the leaves fell in the soft piles across the forest floor. Rivers wound through valleys, carrying salmon, trout, eels and freshwater mussels. Coastal areas offered clams, oysters, crabs, seaweed, and migrating flocks of waterfowl. Inland regions supported deer, black bear, turkey, rabbit, and other game. Across this landscape lived many indigenous nations, each with its own culture, language, oral histories, spiritual traditions, and political systems. Among these were the Wampanoag, Narragansett, Massachusetts, Pequot, Nipmuc, Mohegan, and many others. Their societies were not primitive or simple but sophisticated, highly adapted to the land and organised through extended kinship networks and confederacies. For these peoples, gratitude was not an annual occasion, but an ongoing practice, woven into the rhythm of daily and seasonal life. Thankfulness was expressed for the arrival of fish in a river, for the ripening of crops, for the safe birth of a child, for the return of the sun after winter, and for the cycles of nature that sustained life each year. There were ceremonies for many moments, green corn ceremonies in midsummer to mark the ripening of corn and strawberry, Thanksgiving ceremonies in early summer celebrating the first fruits, harvest ceremonies in autumn to give thanks for abundance, midwinter ceremonies to mark endurance, community, and renewal. These were not isolated events but essential parts of cultural life, times of prayer, song, story, dance, and shared meals. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples maintained a reciprocal relationship with the land, taking only what was needed, giving thanks for what was given, and understanding the earth as a living, interconnected system rather than a resource to be extracted. This worldview forms the earliest roots of what would one day become a holiday of gratitude, though transformed through centuries of cultural change. Now let your mind drift slowly across the Atlantic Ocean, toward Europe in the early 1600s. Picture England at that time, a nation in turmoil, marked by religious conflict, political uncertainty, and social tension. Among many groups living in this unsettled atmosphere were the separatists, Christians who believed the Church of England had strayed too far from biblical teachings. Because they refused to conform to state-mandated religious practices, they were fined, pressured, and in some cases threatened with imprisonment. Seeking religious freedom, many members of this group fled to the Netherlands, where they found tolerance, but also difficulty, low wages, unfamiliar customs, and concern that their children were losing their English identity. They spent more than a decade debating their future, eventually settling on a possibility that seemed both terrifying and full of promise, journeying across the ocean to build a new community in an unfamiliar land. In 1620, after years of planning, negotiation, and financial struggle, the group arranged passage on a ship called the Mayflower. The vessel was not large, around 100 feet long, and was not designed for passengers, but it was the best they could secure. Around 102 people boarded, some separatists, others labourers, servants, and hired workers who hoped for economic opportunity. The voyage began in September, and conditions were harsh from the start. Think of days at sea when the sun barely broke through clouds, the air saturated with cold, salty mist, the ship rocking constantly, passengers sleeping in cramped, dark spaces, children crying from hunger or seasickness, adults coughing in the damp, stale atmosphere below deck. Storms battered the ship. Waves struck the hull with force, knocking passengers off balance. Food supply spoiled. Water grew foul. There was no privacy, little fresh air, and only brief relief when the weather allowed people to climb onto the deck. The voyage lasted more than 2 months. When land finally appeared in November, Cape Cod far north of their intended destination, the passengers felt relief, but that relief quickly gave way to fear. Winter was approaching. They were unprepared, that they lacked adequate supplies, and the land where they eventually settled, a place the Wampanoag called Patuxet, had been scarred by epidemic just a few years earlier. The winter of 1620 to 1621 was devastating. The pilgrims struggled with exposure, disease, hunger, and exhaustion. Only about half survived to spring. But spring brought a turning point. After months of observing the newcomers from a distance, the Wampanoag Confederacy, led by Usamequon, known to the English as Massasoit, made the strategic decision to initiate contact. This decision was not casual. The Wampanoag had suffered catastrophic losses from disease. Their political landscape had shifted. Alliances and rivalries with neighbouring nations, particularly the Narragansett, required careful navigation. Into this delicate moment stepped a man named Somerset, who greeted the pilgrims in English, words learned from prior contact with English fishermen. He opened a pathway for another figure to appear, Tisquantum, whom the English called Squanto. Tisquantum's story was extraordinary. He had been kidnapped by English explorers, sold into slavery in Spain, travelled to England, learned the language, worked with merchants, and eventually found a way to return home, only to discover that his entire village had been wiped out by epidemic. He now stood between two worlds, uniquely positioned to interpret language, agriculture, and diplomacy. He taught the pilgrims essential survival skills: how to plant corn using fish as fertilizer, how to identify medicinal plants, how to catch eels in muddy banks, and how to navigate the local environment. Through these interactions, the pilgrims managed to establish their first successful harvest in autumn 1621. To mark the moment, they organised a feast. Wampanoag men joined them. The gathering lasted several days. It included wildfowl, venison, corn, and other seasonal foods. But to the people who participated, it was a harvest celebration. Not a holiday, not an annual tradition, and certainly not the symbolic first Thanksgiving later promoted in American culture. In truth, the 1621 gathering was just one event in a larger, complicated landscape of diplomacy, survival, misunderstanding, cooperation, tension, and eventual conflict. But harvest Thanksgivings, days of gratitude, feasting, and community, were familiar to the English. And in New England, colonists continued to observe occasional days of Thanksgiving declared by local leaders, especially in response to specific blessings or hardships. For the next 200 years, Thanksgiving existed only in regional pockets, primarily in New England, with no fixed date and no national significance. As the 1600s progressed, the New England colonies slowly transformed from fragile settlements into more stable, structured societies. With this growth came an increased tendency to declare days of gratitude, public observances often tied to very specific events. A successful harvest might prompt one. A military victory might prompt another. Even the end of a drought or the resolution of political tensions could inspire a communal day of Thanksgiving. These early Thanksgivings bore little resemblance to modern celebrations. They were often religious in tone, emphasizing prayer, reflection, and community responsibility. Food played a role but was not necessarily the centerpiece. Sometimes Thanksgivings involved feasting, other times they involved fasting. What mattered most was the collective acknowledgement of some blessing or moment of relief. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, what would become Thanksgiving existed as a patchwork of regional practices. New Englanders maintained it as a semi-regular tradition, while colonies in the South, Mid-Atlantic, and Caribbean-influenced regions had their own entirely different cycles of celebration. Many colonists from these areas had no custom resembling Thanksgiving at all. Still, New England's version gradually gained cultural weight. By the early 1700s, ministers often delivered special sermons on Thanksgiving days, tying current events, harvests, storms, wars, into broader themes of divine providence. Families prepared meals that reflected seasonal availability: roasted meats, cornmeal puddings, pumpkins cooked in various ways, root vegetables stored from early autumn. The imagery that modern Americans associate with Thanksgiving was not yet in place. There were no standardized menus, no set date, no widespread cultural expectation. But the idea of giving thanks, and doing so collectively, at the end of autumn began to form subtle roots. At the same time, the political relationship between English settlers and indigenous nations shifted dramatically. Early diplomacy between groups like the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims gradually gave way to decades of tension, mistrust, and conflict as colonial expansion accelerated. Competition over land, differing cultural values, and aggressive colonial policies intensified friction. By the 1670s, these tensions erupted into a devastating conflict known as King Philip's War, named by colonists after the Wampanoag leader Metacom, the son of Massasoit. This war was one of the bloodiest conflicts per capita in American history, ravaging both native and colonial communities. Its aftermath dramatically shifted power structures in the region, with long-term consequences for indigenous survival, land ownership, and cultural autonomy. These events form a crucial, often overlooked part of Thanksgiving's historical foundation. The holiday, as remembered today, bears little resemblance to the lived experiences of indigenous peoples in the centuries following European arrival. Any honest understanding of the holiday must acknowledge these layers: cooperation, alliance, conflict, and profound loss. Still, as the 1700s moved forward, New England settlers continued to observe Thanksgiving sporadically. The tradition took on aspects of local identity, reinforced by clergy who used the occasions to promote moral reflection and community unity, but it remained a regional practice, not an American one. Then the world changed again. The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, reshaped political identity across the colonies. As the fight for independence unfolded, the Continental Congress occasionally declared national days of fasting and Thanksgiving. One such proclamation in 1777 encouraged Americans to give thanks for a military victory at Saratoga. These proclamations, however, were wartime measures, not fixed annual traditions. After independence, presidents like George Washington issued occasional Thanksgiving proclamations. Washington declared a National Day of Thanksgiving in 1789 to celebrate the ratification of the Constitution. John Adams followed, with similar proclamations, but other presidents, most notably Thomas Jefferson, were reluctant, believing such religiously flavoured observances violated the separation of church and state. So the pattern continued: occasional national Thanksgivings, but no consistent annual holiday. That consistency, when it eventually came, owed much to the work of one remarkable woman. Sarah Josepha Hale, a writer and editor, began a sustained campaign in the 1820s to turn Thanksgiving into a national holiday. She was already a highly influential figure, editor of Godey's Lady's Book, one of the most widely read magazines of the era. Her platform reached millions. Through letters, editorials, and essays, she promoted Thanksgiving not simply as a New England tradition, but as a unifying national celebration. She believed Thanksgiving encouraged moral virtue, strengthened family bonds, and promoted a sense of shared American identity. She argued that setting aside one day each year for gratitude would help heal divisions, encourage reflection, and create common ground among citizens. Hale wrote to governors, urging them to adopt annual state celebrations. She wrote to congressmen, urging them to support national observance, and she wrote to every sitting US president from Zachary Taylor onward. For decades her campaign continued. By the mid-1800s, many northern states had adopted annual Thanksgiving celebrations, but the South generally did not embrace the holiday. Cultural differences, economic systems, and political tensions contributed to the divide, and Thanksgiving remained unevenly recognized. Then in 1863, the nation reached its darkest point. The Civil War was tearing the country apart, leaving families divided, communities devastated, and the future uncertain. In this fractured moment, Hale wrote again to President Abraham Lincoln, urging him to declare a national day of Thanksgiving. That year, Lincoln issued a proclamation establishing a national Thanksgiving on the last Thursday of November. He framed the day as an opportunity for Americans to reflect on the blessings that still remained: productive fields, functioning institutions, and the hope of eventual peace, and as a way to bring spiritual unity to a nation in crisis. Lincoln's proclamation did not instantly create a universally beloved holiday, but it did establish the precedent of an annual, nationally recognized Thanksgiving. Every president after Lincoln issued similar proclamations. The tradition, once regional, now spanned the entire country. After the Civil War, Thanksgiving gradually developed into a fixture of American culture. States coordinated their observances around the national date. Families formed new traditions. Writers and illustrators helped solidify imagery that became associated with the holiday: pumpkins, harvest scenes, families gathered around long tables, autumn landscapes, and nostalgic depictions of domestic life. By the late 1800s, Thanksgiving was celebrated widely, though menus and customs still varied significantly by region and by household. Some families roasted turkey, others served chicken, duck, goose, venison, oysters, or ham. Foods reflected local agriculture, cultural background, and personal preference. In the early 1900s, Thanksgiving gained new cultural components. Cities developed parades. In Philadelphia, Detroit, and New York, schools created pageants, often oversimplifying or distorting early colonial history. Newspapers published recipes and advice columns. Manufacturers used the holiday to promote seasonal products. Thanksgiving was becoming not just a tradition, but part of a growing national identity. Then, in the 1930s, the holiday's date became the subject of controversy. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, seeking to boost the holiday shopping season during the Great Depression, moved Thanksgiving 1 week earlier in 1939. This caused confusion and division. Some states accepted the change, others refused. For 2 years, Americans celebrated Thanksgiving on different dates depending on their state. Finally, in 1941, Congress passed a law setting Thanksgiving as the 4th Thursday in November, a compromise that remains in place today. This decision solidified the modern structure of the holiday. By the early 20th century, Thanksgiving was firmly planted in the American calendar, but it was still in the process of becoming the cultural phenomenon that people recognize today. What began as a regional New England day of reflection was steadily evolving into a nationwide multi-layered tradition shaped by immigration, industrialization, new technologies, and shifting national identities. Imagine the United States between 1900 and 1930. Cities were booming. Millions of immigrants were arriving from Europe, Asia, the Caribbean, and elsewhere, bringing with them their own foods, customs, and holiday traditions. Railroads stitched the country together more tightly than ever before. Factories churned with the movement of modern industry, and households from Boston to Chicago to San Francisco were beginning to adopt Thanksgiving in ways that blended old customs with new American identity. In this era, the meal began to stabilize into something more recognizable. Turkey became increasingly common, not because it was traditional, but because it was practical. The bird was large enough to feed many people, abundant in the northeast, and symbolically linked to autumn. Cookbooks published during this time, especially those aimed at housewives, began promoting turkey as the proper Thanksgiving centerpiece. Pumpkin pie, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes and stuffing were promoted as complementary dishes, creating a standardized menu that slowly grew familiar nationwide. At the same time, Thanksgiving found a place in public life beyond the home. Newspapers printed advice for hosting large dinners, tips for stretching leftovers and suggested menus. Women's magazines shared illustrations of decorated tables, harvest-themed centerpieces, and orderly domestic scenes. This imagery helped form the nostalgic, warm vision of Thanksgiving that would later become iconic. But the most dramatic public expression of the holiday emerged in the form of parades. Although parades existed earlier, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, launched in 1924, gradually became the nation's most visible and influential Thanksgiving event. The first parade featured Macy's employees, dressed in costumes, accompanied by animals borrowed from the Central Park Zoo. Marchers wound their way through Manhattan streets, watched by curious crowds and followed by a Santa Claus figure who symbolically opened the holiday season. Within a few years, the parade added its most recognizable feature: giant helium balloons, shaped like animals, cartoon figures or imaginary creatures. These balloons, towering above buildings, drifting through city blocks, bobbing gently in the wind, became visual icons of the holiday. Families who could not attend in person eventually watched from home once the parade began broadcasting on television in the 1940s. Year by year, the parade embedded itself deeper into the cultural experience of Thanksgiving morning. Television played a transformative role in shaping the modern holiday. When TVs entered American homes in the 1950s, Thanksgiving rituals expanded. Families began watching football games together, first local matchups, then national broadcasts. The Detroit Lions had held Thanksgiving Day games since 1934, but televised coverage made the tradition visible across the country. By 1966, the Dallas Cowboys joined in, cementing football as an enduring element of the Thanksgiving experience. For many households, the background sounds of a game, crowd noise, whistles, commentary, became part of the sensory blend that defines the day. Yet alongside these growing public traditions, Thanksgiving remained deeply tied to intimate domestic rituals. Picture a mid-century American home on Thanksgiving morning. The kitchen is already warm, filled with the early aroma of roasting turkey. Vegetables are being chopped, pie crusts rolled out, bread drying for stuffing. The clatter of pans and the hum of an oven mix with the faint sound of a parade, broadcast from a living room of television. Children dart between rooms. Grandparents sit with coffee, offering advice or sharing memories. The pace is unhurried, steady, rhythmic, familiar. For many families, Thanksgiving became the one time each year when extended relatives gathered in the same place. This created an emotional atmosphere, the joy of reunion, the nostalgia of seeing familiar faces, and sometimes the complexity of unresolved tensions carried through generations. But as Thanksgiving solidified into a national ritual, the cultural narrative surrounding the holiday also became simplified and sanitized, particularly in school settings. Throughout much of the 20th century, American children learned a highly romanticized version of early colonial history. Classroom pageants, often involving construction paper costumes, reenacted the 1621 feast as a moment of pure friendship and cooperation between pilgrims and indigenous peoples. This narrative was easy to teach, visually appealing and emotionally comforting, but it omitted nearly all historical complexity, including the epidemics that devastated indigenous communities and the conflicts that followed early interactions. This simplified myth became so widespread that many adults grew up believing it was literal history. By the 1960s and 70s, however, a cultural shift was underway. Historians, activists, and indigenous scholars began publicly challenging the traditional Thanksgiving story, pointing out the deeper historical context and the long-term consequences of colonization. In 1970, the United American Indians of New England established the National Day of Mourning in Plymouth, a yearly event intended to honor Indigenous ancestors, highlight historical injustices, and offer a more truthful narrative of early colonial interactions. This gathering brought national attention to the complexities of the holiday and to the lived experiences of Indigenous peoples. Far from erasing Thanksgiving, these efforts added depth to its meaning. They encouraged Americans to hold multiple truths at once: celebration and reflection, gratitude and honesty, family joy and historical awareness. As the late 20th century progressed, Thanksgiving continued to evolve in households across the country. In immigrant families, the traditional menu blended with dishes from home cultures. A Thanksgiving table might include pasta alongside turkey, or fried plantains or curries, or rice dishes or roasted lamb, or dumplings or tamales. These combinations reflected the richly diverse fabric of American identity, each household shaping the holiday to match its own heritage. Friendsgiving also emerged as a separate tradition. College students, young adults living far from home, and people with chosen families often created their own celebratory meals in the days surrounding Thanksgiving. These gatherings tended to be relaxed, creative, and full of personal touches. Instead of formal dinners, they included potlucks, board games, experimental recipes, laughter, and the feeling of building a community outside one's biological family. Meanwhile, the weekend after Thanksgiving grew culturally significant. Black Friday, the start of the holiday shopping season, became a major economic event. In the late 2000s, Cyber Monday and Small Business Saturday joined the lineup, creating a consumer-oriented expansion of the Thanksgiving period. At the same time, many families began focusing more on togetherness than on elaborate feasts. Schedules grew busier, budgets tighter, and kitchens more informal. Some households ordered catered meals, others simplified menus. Some embraced vegetarian or vegan versions of the holiday, replacing turkey with plant-based roasts or vegetable-scented spreads. Through all these changes, the emotional nucleus of Thanksgiving remained steady, a moment to pause together and to reflect on the passing year and to be present with others. This emotional core is especially visible in the quiet moments of the day. Picture a typical Thanksgiving evening after the meal has been eaten. The table is messy with plates, glasses, and serving dishes. Candles burn low, their flames flickering gently. Leftovers await storage in the kitchen. In the living room, people settle into couches or chairs, full and content. Some nap, some watch movies, some talk softly, some simply sit in silence, feeling the warmth of the moment. Thanksgiving's power lies in these moments of stillness, moments that echo the ancient harvest rituals of gratitude practiced by Indigenous nations long before Europeans arrived. Today, Thanksgiving is not a single, unified experience. For Indigenous peoples, the day may bring reflection, mourning, activism, cultural celebration, or simply a break from everyday life. For some families it is joyful, for others stressful or lonely. For many it is something in between, but its endurance as a holiday comes from its flexibility. It adapts to the people who practice it. It absorbs new traditions, it sheds old ones. It reflects personal histories as much as national ones, and the evolution continues as we move further into the modern era. Part 4 will continue from here, moving deeper into today's Thanksgiving practices, the emotional atmosphere of the season, and the symbolic transition between autumn and winter that gives the holiday its unique character. As Thanksgiving moved into the 21st century, the holiday continued to evolve, shaped not only by history and tradition, but also by the pace of modern life, the influence of technology, shifting cultural values, and the diverse ways people form community in today's world. To truly understand the modern Thanksgiving experience, begin by imagining a typical late November morning almost anywhere in the United States. The sun rises later this time of year, casting a cool pale light across quiet neighbourhoods. Trees stand bare, their branches thin lines against a grey or softly glowing sky. Lawn grass, Once vibrant green in summer now rests dull and brittle. A thin layer of frost may cling to rooftops or car windshields. There is a stillness in the air, a natural pause that feels almost built into the season. Inside homes, that stillness gives way to warmth and motion. In many kitchens, ovens hum softly. Roasting pans slide into place. Vegetables are chopped in rhythmic patterns. Pots simmer with broths or sauces. Someone sits at a table unfolding napkins, arranging plates and placing cutlery with quiet care. The day unfolds slowly, like a well-rehearsed ritual. Someone turns on a parade broadcast in the background, a tradition that stretches back nearly a century. The huge balloons float between skyscrapers. Marching bands play crisp formations. Children watch with sleepy excitement, pointing at characters they recognize. Adults glance occasionally at the TV as they move through the tasks of the morning. Meanwhile, in many homes, football games begin to play. For some families, the games are central to the day, something they've watched for generations. For others, the games are simply background, enriching noise, a familiar soundtrack that makes the house feel lively. Yet the heart of the holiday is rarely the entertainment. It is the rhythm of preparation, the shared effort, the slow build toward the meal. As the hours pass, the home fills with aromas that feel deeply tied to memory for millions of people. Roasting turkey, herbs like sage, thyme, rosemary and bay, the caramel sweetness of yams or sweet potatoes, the earthy scent of stuffing, the warm spice of cinnamon and nutmeg drifting from the pies cooling on countertops. These scents form a sensory anchor for the holiday. For many, the smell alone brings back memories of childhood, of family gatherings, of relatives who may no longer be present, of stories told again and again around crowded tables. But Thanksgiving today is not defined by one menu. In countless households, the meal has expanded or shifted to reflect cultural backgrounds, dietary choices, personal tastes, and the creativity of home cooks. In some homes, the turkey remains centerpiece. In others, it is replaced or supplemented with ham, roast beef, duck, lamb, fish, or vegetarian alternatives. Many families add dishes that reflect their heritage: rice dishes, noodles, curries, empanadas, dumplings, roti, plantains, couscous, kimchi pancakes, or pasta. These blended tables reflect the immense diversity of American life, where traditions mix freely and new customs form year after year. The gathering itself varies just as widely. Some homes host dozens of relatives, others host small, quiet meals. Some gather with friends, either by necessity or by preference. Some celebrate early or late to accommodate work schedules, travel, or distance. In many places, people volunteer on Thanksgiving, preparing meals for shelters, delivering food to those in need, or donating to food drives. These gestures, big and small, reflect an impulse that has existed in many cultures across time, to extend abundance outward, to share what one has, however modest. But even with these variations, Thanksgiving retains a characteristic emotional tone. It is a day that encourages slowing down, a day that invites reflection, whether intentional or unintentional, a day where people often take stock of relationships, of challenges endured, of small victories, of personal growth, of the year's shifting landscape. And yet for many, the day also carries complexity. Families with strained relationships may feel tension build as the gathering approaches. People who are far from loved ones may feel a sense of distance that grows heavier with the season. Those who have lost family members may find the holiday tinged with sadness, as the absence of particular voices or faces becomes especially noticeable. Thanksgiving can be a mirror showing people the connections they cherish, the memories they hold, and the spaces where loss has settled. Despite these emotional contrasts, the holiday endures because it is flexible, capable of being reshaped by each household, according to need, circumstance, and personal meaning. One household may fill the day with laughter, activity, and celebration. Another may spend it quietly, content with a simple meal and peaceful silence. Some may treat it as a day of rest, staying home, reading, or watching movies. Others may travel long distances to reunite with relatives they rarely see. And for many Indigenous peoples, Thanksgiving brings an entirely different layer of reflection. For some, the day is observed as a national day of mourning, a time to acknowledge the deep losses experienced through centuries of colonization, the epidemics, displacement, land theft, broken treaties, boarding schools, and ongoing challenges. The day may be marked with gatherings, speeches, ceremonies, or quiet remembrance. For others, the day is a moment of cultural pride and resilience, an opportunity to teach younger generations about their heritage, their history, and their ongoing efforts to preserve language, ceremony, and identity. Some Indigenous families celebrate the holiday in ways similar to non-Indigenous families, blending cultural traditions with modern customs. Others do not celebrate it at all. These varied experiences highlight a truth that runs through every part of Thanksgiving's evolution. No single narrative defines the holiday. It is shaped, reshaped, and reshaped again over time by millions of unique lives. And yet beneath all those variations lies a familiar seasonal rhythm that remains constant. Thanksgiving sits at a transitional point in the year. Autumn is nearly over. Winter waits just ahead. The days are short, the nights long, the air crisp, the landscape subdued. There is something about late November that naturally pulls people inward, into warmth, into conversation, into silence, into community. It is the stillness that follows harvest, a stillness rooted deep in human history across continents and cultures. For thousands of years, people have marked the shift from harvest to winter with festivals, ceremonies, and gatherings. Thanksgiving in its modern American form is one branch on that ancient tree. As the holiday unfolds today, it reflects the seasonal cadence. Picture a home in the late afternoon on Thanksgiving Day. The meal is done. The kitchen is messy but warm. Dishes are stacked near the sink. Some people tidy slowly while others rest on couches. A movie plays softly. Someone stirs a cup of tea. Someone else drifts into a nap full from food and the comfortable weight of the day. Outside, the sky darkens early. Streetlights flicker on. The cold air grows sharper. Inside, lamps cast warm pools of light. It is in these quiet, unremarkable moments that Thanksgiving reveals its emotional essence. Not in the meal, or the decorations, or the traditions, but in the gentle pause it creates. A pause in which the world feels just a little slower, a little softer, a little more human. This sense of pause, of stillness, connects modern Thanksgiving back to its earliest roots, to the indigenous ceremonies of gratitude tied to the land, to the colonial days of fasting or feasting in response to hardship, to the 19th century families gathering around simple tables in small towns, to the immigrants blending old customs with new American traditions, to the countless individuals who have shaped and reshaped the holiday with each passing generation. Part 5 will bring the story to its full, gentle conclusion, reflecting on the deeper meaning of Thanksgiving today, its place in American culture, and the way this long, evolving tradition continues to offer a moment of warmth and rest at the end of autumn. As Thanksgiving continues into the present day, the holiday remains both familiar and ever-changing, shaped by tradition, altered by modern life, and continually reinterpreted by those who gather to observe it in countless unique ways. Its meaning is not fixed. It shifts gently from household to household, from one generation to the next, from one community to another. That flexibility is part of what allows the holiday to endure. To bring the story into its final stretch, imagine once again a quiet Thanksgiving evening. The meal has ended. Leftovers are packed into containers or still resting on the table. The kitchen carries the warm afterglow of a day spent cooking, simmered spices, baked pastries, roasted vegetables. A gentle murmur settles over the home as people unwind. Some sit on couches wrapped in blankets. Others talk softly in corners, sharing stories that drift between past and present. A television plays quietly. Perhaps a football game, perhaps a movie, perhaps nothing at all. Outside, the night is crisp and still. A chill settles over driveways and rooftops. Trees sway subtly in the wind. The world feels slowed down, muted, as though it has exhaled deeply after a long day. This atmosphere, the calm at the end of Thanksgiving, is one of the most consistent threads linking the modern holiday to its long winding history. It mirrors the ancient harvest festivals celebrated by indigenous peoples long before the United States existed. It reflects the pauses taken by early colonists when they declared days of fasting or gratitude. It echoes the slow evenings experienced by families in the 1800s and 1900s when the holiday began to take on more familiar shapes. Thanksgiving remains a ritual of transition, a moment to acknowledge the passing of another year's cycle. Late November sits in a liminal space. Autumn has nearly ended, winter has not fully begun. The landscape is subdued. Trees are bare. The air carries the promise of colder days ahead. This seasonal shift naturally fosters introspection. People look back at what has happened, and ahead at what may come. In many homes, Thanksgiving invites this reflection in subtle ways. The gathering of relatives may spark conversations about family history. Old photographs might be pulled out. Stories of ancestors, migrations, hardships, and triumphs may be retold. The meal itself may evoke memories, recipes passed down for generations, dishes that no longer appear except on this one day, flavours that carry whispers of those who once prepared them. Even for those who celebrate alone or in small groups, the holiday often encourages a quiet checking in with oneself, a moment to consider the year's journey, to acknowledge challenges faced, to recognise any small sources of gratitude that surfaced along the way. As Thanksgiving continues to evolve, so too do the practices surrounding it. Many households have adopted new traditions that reflect the realities of modern life. Some hold small gatherings early in the day and expand to larger gatherings later in the evening. Some split the holiday across multiple households to accommodate blended families. Some cook together in person. Others coordinate menus across video calls when distance prevents travel. In recent decades, technology has become a bridge across distance. Families who live thousands of miles apart can still share the day through video chat, showing one another their meals, exchanging greetings, even watching the same parade or movie simultaneously. These digital connections extend the spirit of the holiday beyond the walls of a single home, tying together loved ones separated by geography. At the same time, Thanksgiving continues to hold different meanings for Indigenous communities across the country. For some it is a day of mourning, reflection, and remembrance. For others it is a day of cultural strength, an opportunity to teach traditions, gather with family, or reclaim narrative space by telling their own histories. Some Indigenous families observe the holiday in ways similar to non-Indigenous families, while others choose not to celebrate at all. This diversity of experience challenges the simplistic narratives that dominated much of the 20th century. It encourages a fuller understanding of American history, one that acknowledges complexity, embraces multiple perspectives, and respects the lived experiences of those whose stories were long overlooked. Gratitude itself is a universal concept, present in nearly every culture across the world. People have always found ways to mark the end of a season, to share food, to honour the land, and to strengthen community bonds. Thanksgiving in this sense belongs to a long lineage of global traditions centred on thankfulness, humility, and connection. In the United States, this lineage has taken on a distinctly American shape, shaped by the country's diversity, contradictions, hopes, and histories. The holiday reflects both the beauty and the complexity of the nation, the blending of cultures, the resilience of communities, the tensions between myth and truth, the capacity to adapt and evolve. Consider the quieter changes that have shaped the holiday over recent generations. Smaller families, shifting work schedules, and changing economic realities have led many people to simplify the meal. Frozen turkeys, store-bought pies, and prepared dishes are now common. Some people plan the holiday around work shifts or travel times. Others hold their gatherings on alternate days to accommodate complex schedules. Many people live far from where they grew up, making Friendsgiving an important tradition, one that reflects the changing definition of family in the modern world. These gatherings are often relaxed, humorous, inventive, and filled with the warmth of chosen community. Meanwhile, concerns about sustainability have inspired new approaches using locally sourced foods, reducing waste, composting leftovers, and making environmentally conscious choices. These modern practices, in their own way, circle back to the Indigenous principles of reciprocity and respect for the land. Even the holiday's aesthetics have shifted. Social media has introduced new rituals, posts expressing gratitude, photos of meals, videos of cooking or gatherings. For some this adds connection, for others it adds pressure. But the core of the holiday remains rooted in something older and deeper than any digital trend. As night settles in on Thanksgiving Day, the world feels a little quieter. Traffic slows, businesses close early, even bustling cities take on a softer tone, as if the day's gentle ritual has spread beyond the boundaries of individual homes. Inside, after the meal and the conversations and the slow unwinding, there is a sense of calm that lingers. This calm may feel like gratitude or relief or nostalgia or simply rest. Whatever form it takes, it marks the emotional culmination of the day. Thanksgiving, at its heart, is a reminder to pause in a world that rarely slows down, to pause amid the noise of the year, to pause long enough to acknowledge what sustains us, who surrounds us, and what we carry forward. It does not require perfection. It does not require specific foods or decorations or a large gathering. It does not require reenacting old stories or adhering to rigid expectations. It requires only a moment, however brief, however simple, in which one recognizes a sense of connection, however small. Connection to family, to friends, to oneself. Connection to memory, to tradition, to history. Connection to the land, to the season, to the turning of the year. This moment, a gentle breath, a quiet reflection, a soft settling, is what binds the holiday across generations. As this long story comes to a close, imagine once more the stillness of late November, the night air cold and crisp, the sky dark but dotted with faint stars, homes glowing softly with warm light, the world exhaling slowly as autumn gives way to winter. Inside one of those homes, perhaps yours, perhaps someone else's, the day winds down. The dishes are done or left for tomorrow. People drift to beds or couches. A movie ends. A conversation fades. The house grows quiet. It is in this quiet that Thanksgiving finds its deepest meaning. Not in the myths or the pageantry, not in the rituals or the recipes, but in the stillness that follows the gathering. A stillness that feels like rest. A stillness that feels like gratitude. A stillness that invites sleep. And so, as the story ends, let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let your thoughts drift like the last leaves of autumn falling to the ground. The history has been told. The journey through centuries is complete, and the quiet of Thanksgiving night settles gently around you, guiding you toward calm, peaceful rest. The holiday endures, and so does the warmth it brings.